Mike is our most prolific radical pamphleteer. I think this is your sixth pamphlet plus the Strikers and Hobblers book.
Yeah.
So, and Mike's going to talk about the Barton Hill factory.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Okay, thank you. Just pointing out, she at the back, she won't let anybody out unless you buy a copy of the book. No, joking. You can see here behind me, this is the Loxton picture of the cotton mills. It's not totally clear in here, but this gives you a good idea on the extent of it. So what I want to do is to, first of all, give you an idea of the size, how it was financed, the location, very briefly. And then I'm going to look at, give you an idea of the contents of the book. There's no way in this 40 minutes, whatever I've got, I can actually go through the whole book. It's very detailed. It's about 140 pages. So I want to give you a flavour of it. So I'll show you the contents page and show you the themes that we go through. And then I'll give you some examples which are dotted out through the book on various events which I shall go over in a minute. So, first of all then, it was opened in 1838, but it took a couple of years to build, and it was for finance, and this is the important thing, this is well known anyway, by slave compensation money. So it gets off to a very bad start, and obviously the produce they're using is slave labour anyway from America that the cotton produced. So it's all, that word slavery is always around, even through the whole of the history. You can tell here it's a huge site. These are the main buildings here and back here. I've got some sizes here to give you an idea. So there are 5 floors, and that's the buildings at the back and the sides there. And they're 300 feet by, I'm sorry I'm using feet, that shows my age actually. 300 feet by 60 foot wide and 12 to 14 foot high. And the weaving shed, which is a bit out of the picture, the weaving shed's back here. And the weaving shed could actually use over 1,000 looms. And the weaving sheds are still there where the Barton Hill plaque is actually placed. So you can actually see it. It's where Mike Baker does his, makes his plaques there. If you go, well, you can't actually go inside, but I've been in there, and it is vast. And that size is, I've got it here somewhere, 250 feet by 350 feet. People can try and imagine it. But and it's a lot of, mainly women there, women weavers actually working in it. When it first opened, it was just under 1,000 people were actually employed. But within a few years, that numbers went up to, it varied, of course, 16, 17, 1,800 people over the whole lifetime of the mill almost, but certainly up to the period I'm looking at, to the First World War. You'd have those sort of numbers, and it varied with depending how the cotton industry was actually doing, whether it was depression or whether it was expanding. And most of those were women, girls and boys. Initially, however, it was mainly girls. I've got the numbers here. It was 609 girls. This is in 1840. 609 girls, 115 boys and 17 women and 184 men. The men were mainly doing there was a foundry there, so they would cast the iron, they would mend all the machinery and so forth. So that sort of gives you some idea. Can you change the slide, please? I've got an aerial view which Rich captured for me here, Rich Grove, and this is it's supposed to be Rich. You see the extent here of the actual mill, and here are the gates. That's going to become important later on, obviously when I describe something. There's 2 pillars there, and they still exist actually, and that was the gate from May Street into the mill, and it goes right down onto the feeder canal, which is obviously still there, and the Marsh Street Bridge, which is here. Lots of housing have gone up since. So that gives you an idea from an aerial view how big it is. Can you do another slide, please? And this gives you the gates I'm talking about here. They're still here. I don't think they've got the tops on them, Rich, have they? No? The castle-like turret tops are gone. So that gives you an idea of the gates. Again, that's really important for what I look at later. This is gone. This was a school. That's gone. These houses are actually gone. Okay. Could you give me another slide, please? Right, this is, I thought I'd put up the content because I was fearful I won't be able to get through everything, and there's no way that I actually can. But this gives you an idea of the content. The main theme, I think, or one of the main themes running through the book, is the resistance of women to their exploitation. So it really challenges, I think, the myth that women were submissive and passive women workers during the Victorian period, which some historians have actually peddled through the years. Not everyone, there's more recent work where this is challenged, but there's still this feeling that women are passive, don't want to join trade unions, won't fight back. And you'll see, if you get the book, and of course even from this talk, that this was far from the case at the Great Western Cotton Mill. Although you can't extrapolate from one case study, I'm sure with in the north there'd be lots of cases just like this where women fight. In fact, they did join unions up in the north much earlier than they did in Bristol. So I just want to keep that in mind. That's one of the really important factors of the book, to actually show with empirical evidence of how these women actually fought back. So you can see the coverage we're looking at the state, we're looking at the Factory Acts, yeah, and looking how the workers actually used the law. They were covered by the Masters and Servants Act, and actually industrial relations or labour relations were actually dealt with through courts, because you actually signed a contract, and if a contract's broken, then the company would take the employee to court, and they could be fined or imprisoned. It worked the other way as well, to a very limited degree. As far as employees goes, they were arrested, taken to court as criminals. Employers still had to adhere to the Factory Acts, in theory. In practice it didn't work out, as you'll see. But they could be taken to the courts as well. But they weren't treated as criminals, they were taken to the civil court. And when you read the book, you'll see how very often they were taken to court many, many times through this whole period, from the late 1830s or 1840s right to the First World War. And they didn't seem to mind going to court, because the fines they got were quite derisory, really. So that's the law. The other thing I want to focus on, which I'll be showing you in a minute, is it was such a dangerous workplace to actually work in. And I'll give you some examples of that. Yeah. Coming into mid-century, I want to look at resistance and riots. This is before they actually unionised, so I'm going to give an example of this and give you some sort of flavour. It's one of the biggest actually riots that happened, but nevertheless wildcat strikes and strikes are actually consistent right the way through this period, on and off. And most of these strikes were unofficial, unorganised, not organised by a union. Later on they do, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. And here was in the 1870s is a period when there's attempts to organise women, and that's within the book. I won't be able to have time to touch that on today. New unionism, late 1880s, early 1890s, and again even into the new century, into the 1900s, we get these wildcat strikes when the union membership lapsed, especially among women, because they felt the union represented them, and we can touch on that a little bit later. So again, wildcat strikes actually kick in, and then we get some conclusion remarks. To make Roger jealous, Roger Ball, this has got not only a bibliography, but it's got an index as well. Very hard to do. So it's not perfect, but I got a name index, which I thought was really, really important, because I try to name a lot of people as far as I can. It's mainly going through the courts, so the employees that were taken to courts, mainly women, but some men as well. So I've got a name index, and that helps those people interested in chasing their family history to find out. And there's a general index as well. Not perfect, but I think it's pretty good. Next slide, please. Sorry. Right. So here I want to focus on accidents. And what I've done, this is just one part of the table. Can't get it all in. And I tried to chart through newspaper reports. So this is only reported accidents from 1839 to 1844, just to give you some sort of examples. And you can see that there was deaths. Many of the injuries were to do with fingers or arms, which would get caught in machinery. Machinery was unfenced, although the 1833 Act says that should be it should be fenced. It was very ambiguous whether that could be invoked by the state. And you can see plenty of injuries here, where arms amputated, severely lacerated, lost finger, rest of the hand severely lacerated. Mainly children, young children, not totally. And the reason behind this was that the children were the ones that would piece the cotton together when it would break, and they were also called scavengers. They would go under the cotton machinery to collect all the waste. So they're very near moving machinery. A lot of it was unfenced. And a lot of women would have been on piecework. So piecework is time. So they would want to hurry and to get these jobs done. Now, a lot of the boys would have been actually employed directly on the self-acting machinery, the big machines, were the ones that the men actually run. They would be directly employed by the machine operator rather than the employer. So he, and it would be he, would have to take responsibility. And again, he was chasing to get this work done because it's on piecework. So very, very dangerous place to work. But not only that, hidden health hazards were mainly humidity and dust. And there was a thing called kissing the shuttle, and unfortunately I haven't got a shuttle to show you here. Got my glass case. So each end, when you had a break and you thread the thread through, you suck the cotton end through, and by doing that you'd be picking up dust and bits and pieces. And they would do that sometimes up to 80, 100 times a day, day after day. And that caused lung disease, and that wasn't recognised until the 19th century. So these are the hidden things, and I said this is only a flavour of what's here. I thought I'd give you one example of this boy here, age 14, Thomas Farley, and I've picked on this one to just tell you because he was recruited from the Stroud workhouse. So some boys were taken from workhouses, and Stroud not being that far away, he was only working at the cotton mill for 2 weeks when he got his finger, seemingly, compared with some of the others, a relatively small accident. The wheel ran over his middle finger and crushed it, but it really hurt and was throbbing understandably, and he is looked at and he's sent back to his digs, which isn't very far away, and said, you'll be all right, recover. And of course he's being paid, obviously, and if he's not, he won't be paid if he's sent home. So he comes back the next day and tries to work, but he only lasts till breakfast time, and then really he's really struggling. So he goes, the surgeon has a look at his finger, said, no, you're all right, just sends him home to rest. Later on the day he gets a fever, he gets worse, and again he was sent to the BRI, and it was called that in those days, Bristol Royal Infirmary, and again they sent him home, you'll be all right. Next day he's dead. I tried to look this up Google, perhaps someone else can look it up for me, constitution irritation, and I can't get a clear definition of what that is, but it leads to death, that's for certain. So it is a result of that injury. He actually died. Sorry?
It's a euphemism as well.
Right, is it? Yeah.
It's constitutional.
Yeah. It's something I hadn't come across before, but.
Yeah.
So these were reported in the local newspapers, Bristol Times and Mirror and Bristol Mercury mainly. And so this poor lad, 2 weeks he worked there from the workhouse, and he dies. And it's looked at as nothing really, it's just one of those things, and move on, you recruit another boy, and that's the end of that. Now, during this period, or about 1845, I say there's another part of this chart which I can't get on, a local person wrote into the papers, really concerned about these accidents, and sent a letter in saying about the number of these accidents, the fatalities and so forth, but it was a very polite letter, because he actually says, this is a good employer, what I'm really concerned about, why are these accidents still happening? And so he's very polite in that way, and quite praising, if you like, the employer of Great Western Cotton Factory. And he highlights some injuries, over a couple of years and the reported injuries. And he said, we need to do something about it. And he then focuses on the Factory Acts and saying, look, these machines should be fenced in, so you should, why isn't this being done? And the reaction of the company, rather than saying, look, you know, sorry, or we're trying to do something about it, actually get very defensive, even though this was a polite letter. And they write back and say, we're no worse than any other cotton factory, which may have well been true. I haven't looked at that, but probably was true. And really then gets the newspaper on its side and saying, this is a good employer, he's no worse than anybody else, we should give him the benefit of the doubt. So this was the climate, if you like, within the under the Factories Act and within Bristol and other areas at this time. Another slide, please. Right, so that was a flavour of the accident. Now these accidents, I must say, I've only focused on that 18 to 1845. In the book I relate to a lot more accidents later on. There's a lot more horrific ones in the 1850s, 60s and 70s, where which involve men who were oiling machinery and get caught in flywheels and get their heads crushed, and they were actually killed. So there's a number of nasty accidents in there. Now these are very mild-looking men, the overseers managing the women. This was actually 1899. They look a lot more fierce, I'm sure, 50 years earlier. So this is the only picture we can get. But it just gives you a flavour. I don't know why they've got boys here. I shouldn't think they were. Unless they had, well, apprentices, maybe they were managing the kids as well. I don't know. That may have been the case. But these were the ones installing the discipline, really, on behalf of management. And I thought it was worth showing that caption, just to say. Now, the reason for putting that up, and I'll look at my notes to make sure what I'm looking at here. Yeah. Right. So I'm talking about now the mid-century, about 1851, and I want to look at what was really happening within the factory. And these overlookers will be managing mainly female staff on the spinning machines and on the weaving machines, and they were concerned that there was a lot of, when you had the when you're actually producing this material, and I mentioned before about cotton breaks, you get a lot of cotton breaks, and that would affect wages of the women workers. They constantly complain, actually, throughout this period that I look at, right up to the First World War, about inferior cotton, bad cotton, breakage. And that was where the companies were buying inferior cotton, obviously because it was cheaper. And what was happening is that women, if they didn't produce the quantities they would expect to do, or using the bad cotton, they would be fined. So their wages were very low anyway. In the book, by the way, I've got the wage table, but I haven't shown it to death. So they would be fined. So every week their money would be reduced and fines for various, what they would call misdemeanours, slowness, not using the cotton that they should. So the way the women got around this, and this is the first sign of resistance, there's no trade unions at this stage. They're not unionised. This is really important. So what people do when they're not unionised, and still happens today, you find ways round to resist. And there's lots of ways around it. There's pilfering, absenteeism, and so forth. Absenteeism, of course, they could be taken to courts. But what these women did, to avoid fines, they pick out the bad cotton, and when they're not looking, they smuggle the cotton out. And either when they went to the toilet, try and flush it down the toilets, or mainly, they used to smuggle it out and take it home, and then either dump it in the canal, or burn it on their fires. And this was a very regular occurrence right away through this period. This 1850s, every now and again it reaches a peak. So the managers were really finding problems in actually stopping this. So they started being escorted to the toilets and seeing that, made sure that they weren't actually taking stuff in there to flush away. Well, what they would do then is just take it home in the evenings, stuff it under their garments, which were, I presume, were quite big, and got it out of the workplace. And what the company were doing were then taking, if they find anybody, they would take them to the courts. Okay? And in court, they'd have the hearing, and usually there's an apology by the people who've done it, obviously, saying, sorry, I won't do it again. Sometimes they were fined, but each time these women were taken back. They were never sacked. So initially, while I thought about that, why weren't they sacked? Because of the skill that they've got. They're not that easy to replace, not in the short term. It takes training. So the company were using the courts as a discipline. And the fines were, especially for workers, were quite big. You fine 5 shillings, 10 shillings, and you're talking about over a week's wages. So it was a lot of money. So each time they would be taken back. But this reaches a crisis point. And in this one example I want to give you, the crisis point, the manager, the name was Ashworth, he decides, I want to search these women each time they leave the factory. In other words, at the end of the day, those big gates that I actually showed you earlier on the thing that were open, they would come out through the big gates. They close the big gate, and there's a wicket gate at the side. And he would channel several hundred staff, mainly the women staff anyway, but some of the men as well, and boys, out through this wicket gate, one at a time. And that would take up to an hour to get out. They were working 12-hour days, mind, so an hour to get out of the building, then they got to get home and searching them. Now this went on for 2 or 3 weeks, and these women thought, we've had enough of this, we're going to do something about it. So they decided that one evening they would stop work about 10 minutes early. Yeah, as a sort of demonstration against the management. And then once they got out into the main yard, they decided they were going to refuse to actually go out through this small wicket gate. So this one evening they stopped work 10 minutes early. That's before the steam engines have been shut down. So normally the process where you had to wait for the engines to be stopped before you stop your machine. But they didn't. And then they would be normally channeled out through the foundry that I talked about earlier. So you go out through a foundry, and the door from the foundry would go out into the main yard. From the main yard you then leave the premises either by the double gates or single gates. They get into the foundry only to find the foundry door was shut on them. So obviously these guys or their predecessors heard about this, and they shut them in the foundry. They weren't having any of that. They picked up whatever they saw on the floor, mainly pieces of iron and so forth, and smashed all the windows in the foundry until they opened the door. When they got outside in the yard, they then refused to actually leave the factory. And these were mainly the women weavers, yeah, so hundreds of them. So they actually refused. The manager is sent for. It takes a long time to get the manager. It takes about half an hour. Why it took so long, I don't know. In the meantime, there were people gathering outside the walls of the factory. So it's a local community, which would probably be their families and friends. When the manager comes, he comes with 2 dogs and a sword stick. Sword stick is exactly what it says, the sword going into like an umbrella stick. And tells these women, you've got to leave, or we're going to search you going out through this gate. And they said, no way. And of course all these windows have been smashed. It was described as a very riotous situation. But the situation gets worse. Can I go on to the next slide, please? No. Why have I got a model of a works engine, fire engine? Now, this would be similar to the fire engines they would have had in the works. They would have a number of these. Now, what the manager does, he orders the fire engines, these fire engines out, and he threatens these women. And one woman, Emma Williams, I think her name is. Yes, he threatens her and others and saying, look, if you don't abide by what I'm saying, leave, I'm going to put these hoses on you. Actually, he didn't actually even give them a warning. He hosed them down with these hoses, actually saturated them, and then turned it on the rest of the workforce. There was absolute pandemonium in there, and they all rushed for the half-open wicket gate. In the meantime, from the crowds outside, managed to get in and try and help the workers inside. Now, Emma, the first woman that was saturated water, Ashworth came up and hit her with his stick, damaging her hand, and kicked her 3 times. This is according to the court records that I find in the newspapers, so it might have been worse than that. This is how it was reported. So the people outside trying to help, some of them come in to help the women and children. Outside they started throwing stones. Now this factory had 900 windows, but hundreds of these windows were actually smashed by these stones being thrown from outside. And amazingly enough, in the newspaper report, I've got the numbers. I don't know how they got the numbers of these stones, but apparently there was 2,145 stones thrown, average half a pound each, and 148 panes of glass broken. Well, 148 out of 900, I can't work out the percentage. It's quite significant, isn't it? This was a riot. This was a riot. They send for a policeman, or police, so they say. One policeman turns up and he looks around. I didn't see anything, he says. I'm not giving a report. And he's disciplined. They have an inquiry. He said, well, I didn't see anyone throwing stones. So he's obviously scared of the people inside. Right, I'm spending a long time on this, but I think it's really worth looking at this particular event. It goes more. Can I have another slide, please? Right. I don't know if anyone recognises this picture. This is a modern picture of the old council house, which is now the registry office in Corn Street. People know it, so you can just about see it. Emma Williams, she actually prosecutes the manager for assault, and this is an example where women actually not only took direct action, but actually tried to use the laws that were around. There were laws like the Factory Act, so they actually took Ashworth to court, and the court sessions were in this building. Now, while I've got a picture of it here, try to imagine that when he goes to court, 3,000 people from Barton Hill turn up outside, and the court case goes on for 5 hours, and they're heckling, singing, dancing, making hell of a racket outside, especially when news actually filtered out of any news filtering out of what's happening in the court case. And actually, Ashworth was found guilty and fined. And when they found that out, there was a party. There's hoots and laughter and cheering and so forth. But it didn't seem to have any effect on Ashworth at all, because he still carries on with these practices when he goes back. So this is what I want you to imagine, that this resistance I'm talking about, when they talk about people being passive, there's this resistance. And the resistance is gender and class, and inside and outside the factory. This is families. It's not just the 3,000 people. That's more than the people actually working there. That's the community. So there's a relationship between the community, the working class, and the gender, women being particular, being targeted in these events with fine and so forth. As I said before, it doesn't stop. You have to read the book to find out more that's going on. This comes up time and time again with using inferior cotton. So, not unionised though, and that was the other thing I wanted to mention. Do you remember? Slide one. Okay. I just show that in the 1860s, of course, you have the American Civil War, and I thought I'd just mention this because this is actually a picture of a soup kitchen getting tickets to get soup. This is in Manchester. I couldn't find one for Bristol, although they did have soup kitchens. And in the 1860s, because of the impact of the American Civil War, which I go into a little bit of detail on in the book, which is important within Bristol, because there are meetings with anti-slavery meetings. I can't, not surprisingly, I can't get any feedback or evidence of what the workers actually thought about slavery, whether they were against slavery or not. There's certainly some evidence in Manchester, I think, about support from the women workers, even though they were losing their livelihoods, still supporting the North against the South. It could be exaggerated, I don't know, but certainly I couldn't really find anything in Bristol to find out what's going on. But there were meetings. Now, in one of the meetings in Bristol, Steve would know this, Handel Cosham, yeah, he moves a resolution at one of these meetings in Bristol, supporting the North and President Lincoln and you know, anti-slavery. And the new manager of the factory by the 1860, a bloke called Vickers, he stands up on the platform and puts a resolution against, not against support, he's very careful, but against the resolution put up by Handel Cosham. And people were shouting out, vested interest, because obviously he wants to keep the factory going. That was his main reasons. Although he was saying that Lincoln was not genuine, he's not really worried about abolishing slavery, he was just about interested in unifying the North and South American. So I do briefly touch on this in in the book. But that meeting was really important to see what was happening. There is a vote. Now I would suggest, and this is only speculation, that it's mainly middle class liberal people at those meetings. But I would suggest supporting Vickers would be certainly the male workers from the cotton factory, because they had a relationship with the managers much better than the women did, mainly because their jobs were permanent, they weren't on piecework, a lot of them were mechanics, and they were favourably treated. They were on better money. If they were supportive of management, which they did, sometimes they would. In fact, during the court case, some of the men gave evidence on Ashworth's behalf, that 10 years earlier, saying he was a good manager, he looked after us and so forth. But it depends who he looked after. It's that, what I would call the aristocracy of labour, that skilled work of the people they were looking after. And therefore, Vickers was probably got support of those particular male workers at that meeting. There is a vote that takes place, and whilst there was a significant number supporting Vickers against Handel Cosham's resolution, actually Cosham's resolution actually goes through. So that was the position. Obviously there was splits within Bristol, but certainly that was among the chattering classes, if you like. But what the workers actually thought is very difficult to say. But what they did, what really happened, they were out of work. So for about 18 months, the company were paying them, well, this was the argument, about 2 days of pay, and eventually they had to stop it, and the works closed. They'd virtually gone bankrupt, I suppose. So that was the impact of the Civil War. So you have this hiatus, this interregnum, I suppose, that the cotton factory wasn't operating for a couple of years, not until 1865, when a new ownership actually took it over. Right, let's go on to the next slide, please. And I'm going to rush through this last bit because we want some talks. Now, you can't see that one very well, but this is a banner of the Bristol Gas Workers and General Labourers Union in the Henry Stacey made this, 1889, 1890. It's a shame it doesn't come out. It's very weak anyway. But the point I'm saying about this is the advent, and I've jumped quite a few years here, of course, of new unionism in the late 1880s, 1889 to 1890. And why I mention this, although there's been attempts to actually organise the women, and with little success in the 1870s, this is a period cotton workers come out on strike. They're not unionised when they come out on strike, but this union opens its doors to women workers, right? So it's male and female, and the gas workers union open their doors, and these women are on strike, and they are supported by the gas workers, and they actually recruited into the gas workers union to actually try and progress the strike. This is again detailed in our previous book that I've written on the one edited by Steve, Rog, and myself, and Dave Backwith. So I've taken some material. I've added a little bit of new material in as well about the strike. But initially, it's the women that initiated the strike. That's the point I want to say. It's the women that initiate the strike before they join the union. And once they're in the union, they're supported by the strike committee, the Workers' Organisation Strike Committee, who actually advise them and say, look, this guy's a new manager, a guy called Spathworth. He's not going to give in. They're having 10% pay cuts. That's what it was all about. So he said, you have to accept. They're not going to give in. So please just accept a 5% increase rather than 10% if you can. And they said, no, we're sticking it out, we're sticking it out. Well, all fairness to the Bristol Social Society and the workers, the strike committee and the union, they do get behind them, although they advise them to go back and stick it out to as far as they can. They don't actually win money in that dispute, but they actually get some of their fines reduced, they get some paid holidays at Christmas, a couple of days, and I think Easter a day or so. And other little things of the conditions within the factory. So the union and the women together actually do succeed in doing something. Right. the new unionism, or the almost like a revolutionary situation, it seemed at the time to the people who were actually operating there, because loads of dock workers, loads of industries actually struck at this time. But it only lasts for, what, 12 months at most. And then the employers hit back. And in the 1890s, you've got a situation where the women, in particular, but men as well, relapse their union cards and they fall out of the union. Having said that, there's still wildcat strikes going on. The women still strike. And the union tended to become more moderate. They lost that militancy because they are on the defensive. And they joined a conciliatory body in Bristol to have arbitration on strikes and so forth. And the women liked to take direct action when they had a problem. And they were a bit concerned about the union being too slow to react. We hear the same thing today, don't we, Steve? Look at you. So some of the problems are the same in a sense. And the point I'm making here is, again, I keep coming back to it, but these women are resilient. This carries on in the 1890s, right the way through the 1900s, right the way up to the First World War. Can you just do the last strike, so this slide? And again, just before the First World War, they take strike action again, and this time they'd already fallen out with the union, who actually were opposed to wildcat strikes in the early part of the 19th century. They said, you must stick to union rules, we must negotiate, we've got a relationship with the management there, and we got a good relationship, although this was the guy who wanted to burn the mill down in 1889 if women didn't go back to work. So they're out of the union until, beginning of the First World War, where they strike, and they're then recruited by Mary McCarthy into the women's union. I rushed that last bit because I won't have time for questions. We need to break, obviously. But it gives you a flavour. I can't tell you everything, but I think it gives you a flavour of what's going on, especially the resilience of these women. Okay, so.
Anybody have any questions for Mike?
Did the cotton factory continue after the 1948?
Yeah, actually, cotton was produced there up to 1923, and then it's turned. They turned to silk. It turned into a silk mill, and I think it closes in 1928. To be honest, the end was nigh. This is why I ended at First World War. Gary Atherton, who wrote the Cotton Threads, thin pamphlet, he covers that later period, and the way it actually went downhill because of competition and so forth. I mean, always difficult, the competition, but they always, except for during the strikes time, the new unionism, the only time they weren't paying out dividends. So being union organised and actually taking these strikes did hit the company, there's no doubt about that. I mean, I haven't charted the way it changed management. It changed management in the mid-1880s. But each manager, the manager then, Chuck was Spafford, he was a really woman hater. He hated the women, and in fact, I did find a great quote from him. I got it in the book, that he was against suffrage, and he was saying that God forbid us if we have women running the Houses of Parliament, or sort of words to that effect. I got the exact quote in there, but this shows you his mentality. He's talking about middle class women and working class women, and he just hated them. And it was always it's a problem how to actually control these women. They're independent, he keeps saying, they're independent. I mean, it's great to get this stuff. And I only thank the newspapers from the 19th century, because I do see a sea change after the First World War on reporting in newspapers. I mean, you had the court cases, a lot of it was word for word. They would even put socialist minutes word for word in the newspapers. And that seems to change. It seems to be the watershed, seems to be the First World War. You don't seem to get so much information. I'm talking about local newspapers now, the local ones. So although they were liberal, but they were liberal in a sense that they, in their terms, they were fair. And the information in there is fantastic. I've never been able to write it without those newspapers and whatever people write them as well.
What got you started on it all?
Sorry?
What got you started?
What got me started? Right, well, it was writing about the new unionism of the late 1880s. Actually, I've got to thank Sheila really, because she was writing about a couple of Sheila Rowbotham at the back, who's going to stop you on the way out to sell a book. She is just completing a book that she can called Rebel Crossings, which talks about some women, Miriam, Daniel and Helen Reborn, who were involved in organising cotton workers at this time. And we met, and she encouraged me to write something on that dispute, which I did. And it snowballed from there, and I thought, hang on a minute, is that the only time they had strike? At the time of writing, I thought that's probably the only time they rebelled. It showed, because of this myth around about women so passive, and until you start to uncover, you think, hang on a minute, let's go back to the beginnings, what's happening here? Is why I did it.
The digital, the fact that there's digital, it's possible to look at newspapers digitally, has such an impact on historians, because it used to take years for us to go through every newspaper, turning every page.
It's been a great fun. I did go through some newspapers, they're not all digitalised, and so I've been through some, I have to say, to having it digitalised. But again, there's still a skill in doing it, because you think just put one word in, it all comes up. It's not quite so easy as that. So, I mean, it's taken me, how long has it taken me? It must be 18 months, maybe longer to write, research and write it. So, it's still a lot of work, but Sheila's absolutely right. Without getting through the archives, I mean, you've got to pay, unfortunately, but it's worth it to get that information.
I confess I didn't realise there was a National Federation of Women Workers. Was it affiliated to the TUC? Did the TUC accept it as a...
Yes. When did that start, Sheila?
I don't know, Federation. But eventually it becomes the thing that becomes the women's section in like the TUC. It eventually amalgamates, and I've written about it, I can't remember.
There was, in the 1870s, when they started, I didn't go through this now, there was Bristol, I forget the name of it now, a workers' union, women's workers' union, that is formed and is accepted into the TUC, a very small membership. And they were, but it was for women only, it wasn't for women and men. And they had a particular position. They opposed, actually, and I didn't do this in the presentation, you'll find it in the book, they opposed state regulation. And including reducing your hours, because they're saying that restricts women from working when they want to. So there's a divide about the role of the state, which is pretty interesting, and it's a debate still around today, of course. The state can be good, but it can be bad, arguably, and that comes out within the pamphlet as well, I think.
That banner's in the Manchester. Which is it? I get the two mixed up. Is it the Working
People's History Museum?
It's either that or the library. I can't remember which.
And the earlier banner, the Gasworkers banner, is in Bristol Council's ownership, isn't it?
Well, I tried to get hold of it, but you can't. It's supposed to be at Blaze Castle.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
But I wrote to them. I don't get any answer at all. I've been out there and nothing. There's nothing. So where did we see it? The other side to it, the William Morris exhibition.
That Fiona McCarthy did, and she had that banner in it.
Yeah, but it was the other side they were showing for that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Rather than this side, yeah. So it'd be great to have. I mean, that's really important actually for Bristol's history, and it'd be great. And I'd have to find ways we can put pressure on to get that out and see. I suppose it's quite a poor condition, but it still should be visible. Yeah. And that was painted, I think, by an artist called Henry Stacey, who was the father of Venus Stacey, who was a socialist in Bristol, a member of the ILP, and then did tours, wasn't she, speaking. She died young, actually. So,
one more question here, Mike.
Yeah, this trade union activity would have been happening all over the country, would it? Not just localised to Bristol?
Well, London in particular, yeah. Leeds, but Bristol was one of the leading areas. If you look at the main, like the Times newspaper looked at, they report on it. So, perhaps surprisingly, Bristol comes out as one of the, well, it was still one of the leading cities, although places like Liverpool had overtaken it as a port, as difficult as a port. But it was certainly an era, and Bristol's always been described as sort of probably part of the southwest, a bit apathetic and not much going on, passive. And here's an example that the new unionism spread to Bristol very quickly. It's a port, it's a dock. So in a way, that's not surprising. So yes, it was very, very active, and they had a very strong socialist society then. Bristol Socialist Society, which Sheila and I managed to get hold of the minutes, and we've now put them down into the Bristol Record Office if people want to see the original minutes from 1885 when it started to 1891. So
the women's union was Bristol was one of the first ones, wasn't it? I think it
Yes,
was
that's right.
First branch
Yeah.
was in Bristol.
Yeah.
Wow.
The minutes from the from the trade union, the Socialist Society, are full of references to coffee taverns, aren't they?
That's right,
And
because you
on
wrote on
note,
that, Steve.
yes. So thinking about coffee, it's probably about 10 to now. Perhaps we can have a little break. But yeah, thanks very much.
Don't forget to buy a copy for Sheila. In fact, £5